Hello and welcome back to Witches of the Moon. I'm Eva Maria, your Monday hostess, and this week we're talking about how to craft a spell. This week I won't be linking any informational links because really um, this is sort of more, this week we're sort of more sharing our own personal insights just on how we would recommend sort of like crafting, how you would go about crafting a spell, making up your own spells. At least that's what I gather from the topic we've chosen. Now, in my opinion, the way I kind of go about it is like this. Um, Preliminary preparation is that part that I think your forethought, your planning before. It's like your pre-planning phase. That's the best way I can describe it. The first thing I think you should do, honestly, is if a situation has you riled up, simmer down. And the reason why I say simmer down is because some situations that require for us to, or lead us to want to cast, I should say, some situations like that, they kind of tend to be, not always, but they tend to be situations a lot of times where we are worked up about something or upset about something or concerned about something, or a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times there can be some heightened emotion and like some really crazy thoughts going on, like I need to do something about this is so not good, or sometimes it's just like, oh, that motherfucker, like it could be any number of things. But a lot of times, not always, again I will say not always, but a lot of times, situations that call for casting, you may find yourself riled up. If that is the case, take a few moments or however long you need, I would suggest, to simmer down so that you can think clearly. Because I have found that knee-jerking into spell work or reacting based on emotions gone wild often doesn't lead to a good outcome. Because when you're not thinking clearly, when you're just totally on autopilot, emotional autopilot, oftentimes you fuck up, to be quite blunt, in my opinion. At least that's what my experience has taught me. I have never had a good experience knee-jerking into spell work. I will say though, I'm not trying to say that emotions have no place in spell work. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, like, in your preliminary stage, you really want to set your emotions aside and assess what the hell's going on so that you can formulate your plan of action, in my opinion. So okay, that's number one. Simmer down, collect yourself. The next thing I think you want to do, maybe if you want to plan this out or write this out on paper, that might be something helpful, but you want to get a piece of paper, I think, or you can even just do this mentally, but I think sometimes writing things down helps because then you can not just have it in mind, but you can actually like have it on the paper in front of you, and you can sort of, I don't know, at least for me, I'm a person who likes to plan things out on paper and really just put thoughts out on paper when I'm trying to collect my thoughts together and sort of decide what the hell I'm going to do. The first thing you want to do is identify the situation that needs addressing. What is it that needs attention? Okay? I think it's important to do that because sometimes people are not happy with the situation or they feel something needs to change. But until you identify what needs change, you can't really go and start the process of changing it. You have to be able to pinpoint what exactly is the issue. What is the problem? What needs to change? What needs to be addressed? I think that's something helpful. The second thing you want to ask yourself is, have I been doing everything, or have I done everything that I can to try, in a mundane sense, to remedy this situation? Or am I doing everything that I'm able to try and address this on a mundane level? The reason why I say this is because, okay, I don't believe that the universe is going to reward you if you're sitting on the couch eating potato chips, doing nothing. Just because you've done a spell doesn't mean you're going to get, rewarded if you've done nothing else at all to try and address or remedy the situation. That's just my belief. For example, though, I believe that if you are looking for a job, I believe it's helpful if, aside from your spell work, if every day you're going out and putting out applications, doing the best you can, but if you're still not seeing anything change, you're not getting any callbacks, then yeah, I would say go ahead with your spell work. But if you haven't done or aren't doing all that you can in a mundane sense to try and affect some sort of change to address the situation that is not in flow, whatever situation that may be, I think maybe, pause for a second in your preliminary preparations for spell work and maybe, start thinking about what you could be doing and maybe put some things into effect on the mundane level as well as, in a spiritual sense, or even before you start any kind of spiritual, planning or acting, you may want to, at least before then, you want to maybe start doing something to sort of act in accord, as they say. That's the second thing you want to do. Ask yourself, have I done everything I can on a mundane level to try and address the situation first? Am I doing everything I can? If the answer is yes, but I'm still not seeing any kind of results, then yeah, you want to go ahead. If the answer is no, put your spell planning on pause, I would say, and maybe focus on what you could do first in the mundane sense. And then you can revisit, I think, your preliminary planning and then move into your spell work phase. So there's those two things, okay? Or I should say those three. You've simmered down. You've asked yourself to identify what it is. You've identified it. Third thing, you've identified and, addressed whatever the heck is going on in a mundane sense. You've been doing all that you can do, or you are yet doing what you can do, but let's say you're not seeing results. Fine. Now, the third thing that you're going to ask yourself on paper is, what do I want? Like, what solution to the problem would be most ideal, or what am I seeking? You want to have an idea of what you want. The universe is going to have a hell of a time giving you what you want if you don't even know what you want. You need to have some idea of what you want. And it begins with identifying what is not in flow and acting in accord, and then knowing what you want. Then there's one more thing I think you should do. One more thing, I would say consider, here's where a little more forethought comes in as well. Consider what some options may be since you've identified the problem and, you're addressing it or whatever in a mundane sense, or you've addressed it in a mundane sense as much as you could. And since you have defined what it is you're looking to achieve, explore with forethought some options of how you might go about affecting change. Let's say your neighbor drives you fucking nuts. There's a few things you could do. I mean, you could make a move. You could cast so that your neighbor could have some empathy and understand where the hell you're coming from, and maybe they could then modify or stop their annoying behavior. You could curse the shit out of your neighbor. Like, these are just as an example. I'm not saying like you have to curse everybody who pisses you off. But what I'm saying is, like, explore options of, okay, if your neighbor's pissing you off, that's the problem. You want your neighbor to, what you want is you want your neighbor to stop pissing you off. Okay, well, how could you go about stopping him from pissing you off? You want to come up with some thoughts, even if they are things you don't necessarily want to do, or even if they sound a little far-fetched or whatever. Just let it fly. Write it down. Just write down some options. And then what you're going to do is you're going to explore, okay, well, what are some potential consequences or final outcomes to my approaching the situation that way? For example, if you make your neighbor move, somebody's going to move in the house after. Is that person going to piss you off worse? Are you going to have to cast again to ensure that that person that moves in is not an annoying fuck? Just to give you an example. Or, making the move, hey, maybe the situation will remedy itself. But the point is to consider potential consequences or potential, what could follow action A, what will follow? What will be that letter B that comes afterward? Because you did this, what could potentially come out of that? You might want to, explore the pros and cons, what could happen. And then I think you may want to choose whatever whatever action plan in that vaguer sense, whatever action plan seems to have the least potential negatives to it, or which one seems to feel like it has the best, most likely potential outcome to it. You know what I mean? The one that just feels like, okay, there's less that could potentially go wrong with this one, and I feel that this one is probably the one that will most likely remedy the situation in the way that I want. So that's how I think would be a good way to decide on what you want to do. So once you've done all of that, you've simmered down, you've identified what needs to change, you've done all that you can, or you are still doing whatever you can to try and act in accord to try to remedy on a mundane level. You're supporting your spiritual working, or your planned spiritual working. You're already supporting it, backing it up with mundane action. And you've identified what you want and how you want to go about getting what you want. You have this idea in your mind, okay? Um, one thing I would say, one thing I would suggest before moving into the next stage, which is the more specific planning, I would suggest either doing a divination for yourself on the situation, or if you don't think that you can be objective, if you feel that you are too emotionally involved with the situation, you can just turn to someone that you trust to give you an objective reading, someone that has nothing to gain from if you do this, that, or the other thing. The reason why I suggest some people might want to turn to someone they trust is because there are people that feel that it's hard to be objective when you are emotionally involved in something. Sometimes people feel like, if I'm so emotionally invested in this, maybe I'm going to see only what I want to see rather than the objective truth. And you know what? I don't think that's any reflection on how good or bad of a reader you are. It's just, hey, you're human. You're human. Sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're deep in it, you know? Anyway, so yeah, I recommend divination. And in the course of the divination, you're basically seeking out to know, hey, is spell work in fact a good idea? And, what is potentially going to come out of my pursuit of spell work in trying to remedy the situation or change something about the situation that I feel needs magical attention to be addressed. Then you basically have to make up your mind. What are you going to do given the insight of the divinatory, consultation, and given your preliminary introspection? What are you going to do based on those? I can't tell you what to do. Only you will know in your specific situation, given your preliminary planning and the divination that you've consulted. All situations will be different. The next stage, I would honestly recommend using a notebook for, like a witch's notebook. Once you've decided pretty much what your intention is going to be and how you're going to go about affecting that intention or manifesting that intention, be it for good or ill, you'll decide on whatever method of magical technique that you want to go with. There are as many different kinds of magical approaches as there are grains of sand in a desert. There's no right or wrong way. I couldn't even possibly list all of the different approaches you could take, but there are many. I would say if the situation is extremely dire, maybe this isn't the time then, if it's a dire situation, to try something new. Maybe this would be a time to kind of go with what you know, go with what you feel confident casting. In other words, if you're a really strong, practitioner in terms of your candle work, this is not a time for you to try something completely foreign to you from some other path that you've never tried before, but you've been drawn to learning. I would save stuff like that for like maybe times when it's not as big of a deal, or when you're experimenting magically just for the sake of learning. Because when you've got a lot riding on what's going on, I would think maybe you'd want to go with what you know, knowing that you're solid in your technique, in your technical practice of that particular sort of magic. Just my personal insight, though. It's totally up to you what you want to do. So in your notebook, you're going to want to basically choose your specifics, depending on what kind of spell you're doing. What sort of tools will you be using, what kind of ingredients? Are you going to have any kind of specialized timing for your work? All that sort of stuff. Whatever ingredients you're going to choose, I recommend that you choose them according to their correspondences, associations, and symbolism. In other words, if you're doing love work, you're going to want to use things that are conducive to love. For example, if you're using herbs, you're going to want to use herbs that are conducive to love. Herbs like, for example, rose or lang lang or catnip, or, things of that sort, honeysuckle, things that are very like love oriented. You're not going to want to be like, let me bang out some hot pepper, and no. You're going to want to stick with the associations of what is in flow with your intention. Okay. Same thing with colors. If you have anything that's going to be colored, any ribbons, candles, anything that may be of colored in your work, you're going to want to consider the associations. Again, if you're doing love work, you may want to consider colors like, for example, pink for like a sweet love, or maybe red for like lust, or some people use white for true love, things like that. You're going to want to consider your color associations. You're going to want to consider, is there any numerological associations that come up? So yeah, you're going to choose, the things you're going to use. You're going to choose your tools. You're going to choose your timing, your location, all that kind of good stuff. I would recommend writing down all of the things that you've chosen, your whole process, what you plan to do, ingredients-wise and actions-wise in your witch's notebook or your whatever working notebook. And then you're going to do the spell. I do recommend grounding and centering afterward, because a lot goes into spell work. You are raising some powerful energies for good or ill, and the best way that I could kind of give you an analogy or a metaphor for what it's like, the whole grounding centering thing, it's like when you throw a party, you ain't going to leave your house a mess. You're going to want to go and clean up after the party. It doesn't negate that you've had a party. It's just like, hey, party's over. You're going to clean up and you're going to go about your life. Same thing. You just don't want to be walking around with all that like kind of energy. And if it was a cursing work too, you raise some pretty funky dark energy in cursing. So you don't probably want to be carrying all that like vibe around with you that you've raised up. You probably want to cleanse that off of you. Ground center cleanse, I would recommend after workings. You don't necessarily have to cleanse after positive workings, but if you're doing negative workings, I would say, yeah, cleanse too. Cleanse too. I mean, personally, I think that's a good thing to do, just so you're not carrying around that baggage of what you were raising and sending out. That can kind of residually stick with you. And finally, ultimately, what I would suggest is that when your results are in, for good or ill, write them down. The reason I suggest writing them down, the reason why I suggested the Witch's Notebook altogether is that it's a way to assess the success or failure of your works. You can revisit them, you can tweak them, you can try again if they didn't quite work out the way you wanted them to. If they worked wonderfully, you've written down everything, you've got the recipe, you can do it again. You'll know exactly what you did, you'll have your methodology, you'll kind of develop, through trial and error. You're going to see like things that succeed and you're going to see things that didn't quite, or maybe you'll look back later. Maybe it'll be in a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, whatever. You'll look back into your notebook and you'll be like, I can see here and here and here and here, as you learn, as you get more knowledge and experience and understandings of things, you'll start to see where like certain things, okay, it makes sense that this didn't work here and here and here. And, you can go back and be like, okay, I'm going to change this and this and this and try again. And, whatever. It happens. It's happened to me. I've revisited old witches' notebooks and been like, yeah, I don't know why that would have worked. And then there's certain ones that I was like, oh, well, I know that one worked excellently. I'm keeping that. The best of your works that you've refined and fine-tuned, you can copy those into a special book that is like, I guess you could call it your Book of Shadows, but whatever. It's like your best works book. You know what I mean? You could kind of copy your best stuff in there. So, I'm sorry if this is really vague, but how can I be specific? We're all so different. And I can't tell you what to do. But this is how I sort of go about it. If you want to make your own spells, that's a really good exercise, I think, to really practice, the whole process. And you know what? Your process might not be my process. You may not have preliminary divination and then specific planning of ingredients and so on and so forth. You may not follow that pattern, and that's fine. You don't have to be like me. You don't have to be some clone, Go where you're led, do what feels right for you. I'm just suggesting to you what works I find for me. And I find that, personally, I feel that in all my experience, my process of creating my own works like this has not failed me yet. And that's basically all I can really tell you. I hope it's been helpful. With that said, I welcome your thoughts, questions, comments, anything you'd like to add. Please share those in the comment section below. I hope I've at least given you something to think about or inspired you in some way, helped you. And with that, I wish you blessed be and ashe. Cheers. In case you've been wondering, I am drinking Johnny Appleseed hard apple cider. It's good shit. It's really good shit. So cheers. And yeah, even or apple, right? Anyway, blessed be and ashe. Till our next exchange. But bye for now. I look forward to seeing what everybody else brings forth this week, because this is an awesome topic yet again. But bye for now.